Hola amigos. This video ties into my last video on sexless marriages and about hopping through hoops, through hoop jumping. How in a sexless marriage the wife will sit out an obstacle course of do's and don'ts with the promise of sex. And how, no matter how hard we try, you're never able to jump through all the hoops. And if we do manage to navigate the obstacles, it's never quite good enough, causing a sense of failure and helplessness on our part. So, we ask, why the obstacle course? And after we ask ourselves this, we ignore the obvious answer. She doesn't want to have sex with us. And we also ignore the other obvious. She doesn't love us. Gentlemen, she's lost that loving feeling. So it raises another question. Why does she keep us around? Well, let me answer that with an example from my life. The other day, I got in my truck and I drove into town to go to an ATM. I didn't love that ATM. I didn't care about that ATM. And whatever needs that ATM may have had, I wasn't there to meet those needs. I went there for cash. It was a resource, just a useful machine to fulfill my need for cash. Do you get what I'm saying? We are an income source. Okay, then we are, or may be, or have been, an income stream. Why the cruelty and abuse of the hoops? Guys, the hoop is just a symbol of hope. And when you fail, as you will gradually lose hope, and it leads to hopelessness. And for the good man, which the vast majority of us are, hopelessness becomes helplessness because we are invested in our marriages. We want them to work. Hoops don't work on the Chads and the players of the world because they are not invested in the relationships. When the sex stops, they leave. Now what happens to a good-hearted, gentle man is a thing we call learned helplessness. So let me tell you about an experiment that was done by some psychopaths that we call psychologists back in the 60s. They took a bunch of dogs and they put them in a cage. And onto that cage, they put electrodes. And when the dog was on one side of the cage, they would shock the crap out of it. It wouldn't kill the dog, but it would hurt the dog, cause a lot of discomfort. So what did the dog do? It would run to the other side of the cage. And then again it would get shocked, and back and forth and back and forth, until finally those dogs just laid down and took it. They had learned helplessness. There was no escape. Amigos, the hoops, the obstacle course, the false promises are just a form of electrical shocks. It is abuse, just like it was to those dogs, and for the same reason, to make us helpless, to make us feel trapped. However, unlike the dogs, we are not helpless, and we are not trapped in a cage. We have learned helplessness, therefore we can unlearn it. And the first step is to drop the word helpless and acknowledge that we have been deceived. We are not helpless. We are powerless over the situation. Now, we don't really like the concept of being powerless, but that's one of the basic tenets of Stoicism. We are powerless over most everything. We are powerless over society. We are powerless over politics. We're powerless over time, death, circumstances, and most assuredly, we are powerless over other people's thoughts, actions, and opinions. And this includes our wives, or in my case, ex-wife. So what are we not powerless over? We're not powerless over ourselves. We're not powerless over our own thoughts, our own actions, and opinions. And we're not powerless over our own ability to walk away from a toxic situation. These we control. So what can we do with the control that we do have? Let me ask you, what would you do if you fell into a pool of toxic waste. I'd know what I'd do. I'd get out of the toxic waste. What if your wallet fell out of your pants and was in the toxic waste? I'd leave it there. I could get a new wallet, and I could get more money to put in the wallet that I lost. Stuff is not worth losing my life in toxic waste. But what if there was a whole bunch of people who wanted you to stay in that toxic situation? I'd know that they were selfish and did not have my best interest at heart, so I'd ignore them. We must unlearn helplessness and replace it with the understanding we are powerless over the other person. We are not powerless over our ability to get out of toxic waste. Guys, a sexless marriage is toxic, and it is a waste. Remember, guys, life is hard. Don't make it any harder than it needs to be. Keep it real. Adios.